In our last class, we talked about musical genres, and that genres are musical styles. And we also discussed like what makes a genre identifiable. For example, like what makes hip hop sound like hip hop? What makes reggaeton sound like reggaeton, or a house beat sound like house beats? Well, it's really three major elements. One are the rhythms that are used. Two is the tempo that those rhythms are played at. And the third thing are the actual instrument sounds that you use for the drum track. Once we identified those three elements, we then went into Soundtrap, and you created each of these different genres in Soundtrap. For the assignment that you're going to work on today, you're going to actually create these same genres and drum tracks in Earsketch. But first, let's talk a little bit about Soundtrap and how we created these rhythms. So all of these are MIDI tracks, meaning that the sounds that are created aren't real sounds. We're using MIDI sounds from our preset library, meaning these aren't real sounds, but they're computer generated sounds. And down here in the Patterns Beatmaker grid, we're telling the computer when we want to hear the different sounds. So for example, with the kick drum, I want the kick on beats 1, 2, 3, and 4, which means I'm going to click on boxes 1, 5, 9, and 13. I'm telling the computer this is when I want to hear these sounds. The other information I'm giving to the computer is the tempo. Here's the tempo that I want you to play those sounds at. And then finally, I can change my preset sound by going into the preset library and choosing different preset drum sounds. So when you think about coding in Earsketch and the definition of coding, coding is writing a set of instructions for a computer to follow in a language that the computer understands. When we think about Soundtrap and we are clicking on these boxes, really what we're doing is programming Soundtrap. We're telling the computer when we want to hear these sounds. The snare drum, we want to hear that sound on beats 2 and 4. So we click on the fifth box and box 13. That's basically instructions that the computer is going to take and then convert those instructions into the drum tracks. It's really the same process that we use in Earsketch. It's just that in Soundtrap, instead of typing out lines of code, we're clicking on pictures, essentially, to give the computer the instructions about when we want to hear the sounds. So we're going to be using these patterns we set up in Soundtrap to create these same drum patterns in Earsketch. So in Google Classroom, go and click on the link that will take you to the Earsketch assignment. Let's do that now. Once you get into Earsketch, using the link, you'll see that I have a lot of lines already here. And in front of each of these lines, I have a hashtag. Hashtags are used to create what we call notes in a script. So when you put a hashtag at the beginning of the line, basically Earsketch ignores that line. So if I want to leave notes in the script for you, or if while you're working on a coding script, you want to leave yourself a note, but you don't want the computer to try to run that line, you just put a hashtag at the beginning of the line. And you can see it'll change colors when I add the hashtag. So starting on line 6, it says that we're going to create variables for drum samples below. Now, let's talk about variables. So variables in coding are really cool because what it does is it allows us to insert simple words that the computer will convert into what are sometimes more complicated file names or commands and things like that. And to create a variable, first we just type the word. So what I want you to do on line 7 is type the word kick, K-I-C-K, and then type an equal sign after it. So when we add the equal sign after that word, we've created a variable, and the variable is kick. After the equal sign, we have to tell Earsketch what we want to assign to that variable. Now, over here on the left, you want to make sure that you're in the Sounds tab. And then you want to click on this tab that says Genres. Once you get into Genres, you want to find the box that says Make Beat and click on Make Beat. This would be a good time to stop the video and make sure you have your kick equals on line 7 and that you've got this set up on the left. Once you have that done, click in the search box here at the top and type in the word kick. Below, what you're going to see are what we call the samples that Earsketch has for a kick drum. Samples aren't loops, they're just single sounds. So if you click on a play button, there are actually 7 different kick sounds that you can use. So what you're going to do is you're just going to choose the kick sound that you want to use. And so I kind of like that boomy. So to do that, I'm going to click on this blue clipboard. And notice when I do that, it adds in the name or the file name for that kick sample, OS Kick 01. So take a moment and listen to the kick sounds and then click on the blue clipboard to add your kick sound. Now notice these samples over here are all in capital letters. Capital letters usually indicate what we call a constant. A constant is information or data that a computer program saves that does not change. Constants are kind of the opposites of variables. Variables, for example, kick, are all lowercase. And a variable is information that a computer stores that can change. Meaning, when we create variables, we can define what that variable is going to stand for. We can't change what file OS Kick 01 is going to be. So we created the variable by putting an equal sign, and then we added the constant for the kick sample. Once you do that, at the end of the line, hit return so that line 8 is now blank. And on this line, type the word snare and then an equal sign. So now we've created the variable for our snare sound, and now we need to find the constant we're going to assign to that. So back over here in the search bar, let's type the word snare. And below, you'll see there's 6 different snare sounds. They're all a little different, and you just choose the one that you want to use and then click on the blue clipboard. And then it's going to paste that constant over here for the snare. Next, at the end of line 8, hit return so that line 9 is now empty, and type 2 letters, HH equals. HH is going to be my variable for hi-hat. Now this will be a little bit different, because this time over here in the search bar, instead of hi-hat, I'm going to type the word closed. So if you type closed, you'll see below there's 6 different closed hi-hat sounds. I think I'll do that one. And then click on the blue clipboard to put the constant. So when you're finished with this, you should have 3 variables, kick, snare, hi-hat, followed by an equal sign. And then after the equal sign, you're going to have the constants or the sample files that we've assigned to each one of those sounds. Now, the next step in this is telling Earsketch what rhythms we want it to play for each of those sounds. To do that, we're going to need to go back into Soundtrap. If we take a close look at the house beat grid that we created in Earsketch, when we programmed these beats in Soundtrap, we simply clicked on the boxes to let Soundtrap know when we wanted those sounds to happen. When we do this in Earsketch, we're going to do something similar, except instead of having boxes that we click on and boxes that are empty, we're going to be using zeros and the dash. And if you notice on your keyboard, the 0 and the dash are right next to each other on the keyboard. So in Earsketch, for every box that we clicked in Soundtrap, we're going to put a 0. And then for every empty box for that same row, we're going to put a dash. So in Earsketch, instead of clicking on the boxes, we're going to have to type this series of zeros and dashes. So let's go back to Earsketch and let me show you how we do that in the script. Communicate to Earsketch how we want these rhythms to happen. We have to create what's called a string. And a string is simply a set of characters that we place inside of quotation marks. So characters are the letters and the numbers and the symbols on your keyboard. So the 0 and the dash would be characters. So to complete this step, you're going to click on line 11. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a variable for this beat string. Let's type kick1 equals. After the equal sign, this is really important that you type a quotation mark. The quotation, you're going to hold the shift key down, and the quotation key is just to the left of the return key for your quotation mark. Now, if you remember in Earsketch, that pattern for the kick was 0 dash 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 4 times. So if we look at that again, the way I do this is I put my index finger over the 0 and my middle finger over the dash on the keyboard. And then I look at the grid. And as I'm looking at the grid, I do this in groups of 4, because if you look at the grid, the boxes are grouped into groups of 4. So in my head, I'm saying 0 dash dash dash. And as I say that in my head, I'm typing that on the keyboard. And then I pause for a moment, and again, 0 dash dash dash. Pause, 0 dash dash dash. Pause, 0 dash dash dash. And the whole time I do this, I'm just looking at the grid. And then once I finish the row, I'll go back and look at Earsketch to see what the string looks like. So the kick string should look like this. And it can be hard to see because the zeros and dashes are so close together. And that's one of the reasons why, as I'm typing this, I keep my eyes on the patterns grid instead of looking at what I'm typing. Now, I could go back and check. If I start with the cursor just to the right of the 0, I can say it as I click my arrow butt keys. 0 dash 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 0 dash 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 0 dash 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 0 dash dash dash. So that looks correct. Each of these strings should have 16 characters. And that one does. So now, next, once you have this finished, click the end of the line and return line 12. So on line 12, we're going to set up the beat string for the snare. So first, create a variable by typing snare 1 equals, and then a quotation mark. Now, let's go back to the Patterns Beatmaker grid again and look at the snare row. So again, for the snare string, I'm going to keep my eyes on the snare row while I have my fingers over the 0 and the dash. And I'm going to work in groups of 4. So starting off here with the snare, I'm going to go dash, 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 dash. Then 0 dash, dash, dash. Then 4 more dashes, dash, 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 dash. And then the last beat, 0 dash, dash, dash. So when you have that, your beat string for snare 1 should look like this. Again, the dashes and the zeros are really close together. And so I find it difficult to actually look at Earsketch while I'm typing this out. which again is why I keep my focus on the grid. The last thing we're going to do is at the end of row 12, hit return so that 13 is empty. Now we're going to do our hi-hat pattern. So type HH1 equals and then your quotation marks. Now let's go back to the grid. So again, I get my finger set on the zeros and dash, and then I read my hi-hat line from left to right. 0 dash 0 dash. Again, 0 dash 0 dash. 0 dash 0 dash. 0 dash 0 dash. Now let's go back to Earsketch and see what that looks like. So as I look at this, I realize I've kind of messed something up a little bit. So let me fix this real quick, and I'll fix it in the link that you have too. So what I just created was my house beat. So I'm just going to delete this. Okay, so that's going to change my numbers up a little bit from what I had in the instructions, but that should be correct now. So that's our house beat. Now, what I want you to do is use the slideshow that I have posted in the assignment. And in that slideshow, I have the beat strings laid out for Billie Jean, the reggaeton, the Afro beats, the hip hop, and the EDM. And you're going to create beat strings for each one of these. Now, the thing you have to remember is you're going to have to use a different variable for each of the different genres. So, for example, with Billie Jean, you might want to make the variable kick B for Billie equals quotation marks. Your snare variable is going to be snare B equals quotation marks. HHB equals quotation marks. For reggaeton, that might be kick R equals. And then if you remember with reggaeton, there was no snare line. It was just a hi-hat. So I'm going to do HHR, hi-hat reggaeton equals parentheses. Afrobeats, kick A equals snare A equals HHA equals. So I'm just going to continue creating variables for each of these patterns. Kick HH, kick hip hop equals snare HH equals HH HH, hi-hat hip hop equals. And then finally for EDM, I'm going to do kick E. I'm just going to use the E. Snare E equals. And then HHE equals. So with that, I have all of the variables set up for the beat strings. So now you're going to use the slides to create the beat strings for each one of these genres. So now I'm going to create the beat strings for Billie Jean, and I'm going to start with the kick. So first I'm going to click in between the quotation marks to get my cursor blinking, and then I'm going to go look at the slideshow. And I'll position the windows side by side so I can see my Earsketch screen on one side, and I can see the Patterns Beatmaker grid from the slideshow right next to it. And so again, I'm going to focus my eyes on just the boxes in the Soundtrap grid. I'm going to put my fingers over the 0 and the dash, and as I read through each group of 4 in my head, I'm going to type it as I say it in my head. So this kick line is going to go 0 dash 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 0 dash 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 dash. That order was a little wonky, but I'm going to go back and look at Earsketch and see what that string looks like. And that's what the completed kick string is going to look like for Billie Jean. So next I'm going to go to the snare. So again, I'm going to put my cursor in between the quotation marks. I'm going to get my finger set over the 0 and the dash. And then I'm going to focus my eyes on the snare row. And as I say it in my head, I type it with my fingers. Dash, 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 dash. 0, dash, dash, dash. Dash, 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 dash. 0, dash, dash, dash. Then I'm going to go look in Earsketch and see what it looks like. And that's what it should look like in Earsketch. So this last one I'm going to do side by side, just so you can see that version. So in the rest of the grids that you have in the slideshow aren't going to have these zeros and dashes already there for you. So for example, this hi-hat line, as you're going from left to right, in your head, you have to be thinking 0 dash 0 dash. Then a little pause. 0 dash 0 dash. 0 dash 0 dash. 0 dash 0 dash. And again, I would encourage you to think about this in groups of 4 boxes at a time, because it will get a little tricky in some of these other genres. So I'm going to go into Earsketch and click in between my quotation marks, and then I'm going to focus my eyes over here, and as I read this left to right, I'm going to type it as I say it. 0 dash 0 dash. 0 dash 0 dash. 0 dash 0 dash. 0 dash 0 dash. And when you finish, your beat strings for Billie Jean should look like this. Okay, so to finish up this part of the assignment, you're going to go through the slideshow and do the same thing for each of these patterns, so that you have your beat strings laid out for each of the different genres. And then once we have our beat strings made out, the second part of this assignment, I am going to show you how we actually make Earsketch play those drum tracks.